This is Mr. Wesley, and there is a specific and deeply frustrating experience that a significant number of women over 50 describe when they encounter a man who has genuinely rebuilt his life after gray divorce and who is, by every observable measure, completely fine without them. Not performing fineness, not projecting a confident front that a perceptive woman can see through in the first 20 minutes of a real conversation. Actually, genuinely, specifically fine. A man who has a full life, a clear sense of what his days are for, genuine friendships that sustain him, a relationship with his own interior life that does not require external validation to remain stable. A man who is interested in connection but not desperate for it. Who would genuinely enjoy a relationship with the right person but who is not organizing his life around the absence of one. Who meets a woman with warmth and genuine attention and then goes home to his own life without the anxious follow-up, the over-communication, the specific and recognizable energy of a man who needs the connection to work out in order to be okay. And the experience many women have in the presence of that man is, against everything they consciously believe about what they want, an attraction that is stronger, more immediate, and more persistent than anything the eager and available man produces in them. The man who needs them less draws them in more. And that dynamic confuses them, frustrates them, and in some cases genuinely unsettles them in ways they cannot fully articulate, because it contradicts the story they have been telling themselves about what they are looking for. That dynamic is what today is about. Not as a manipulation strategy for men, not as a trick to deploy in the dating marketplace, as a genuine and clinical explanation of a documented psychological phenomenon that has specific and real implications for women trying to understand their own attraction responses and for men over 50 who are navigating the post-divorce years and trying to understand the changed relational position that genuine rebuilding has produced. Let me give you the mechanism. The foundational concept you need to understand is what psychologists who study adult attachment and social dynamics call non-neediness as an attractiveness signal. This is not a pickup artist concept, and I want to be very clear about that distinction because the concept gets borrowed and distorted by that world in ways that strip it of its actual clinical meaning and turn it into a performance rather than a genuine state. Non-neediness in the clinical sense is not the performed indifference of a man who is pretending not to care in order to produce a reaction. It is the genuine and stable psychological state of a person whose core sense of security and well-being is internally generated rather than externally dependent. It is not a posture. It is a condition, and the reason it functions as an attractiveness signal, specifically and powerfully, is rooted in evolutionary psychology, attachment theory, and the specific social dynamics of adult intimate partnership in ways that I want to walk you through precisely. The evolutionary layer first, because it is the foundation without which the rest of the mechanism does not fully make sense. Across the evolutionary environment in which human mate preferences were shaped, a male who was genuinely self-sufficient, who had secured resources, status, and social standing sufficient to his own survival and comfort without dependence on any particular external relationship, was signaling something specific and valuable to the female nervous system, assessing him as a potential partner. He was signaling that his continued presence in a partnership would be a genuine choice rather than a necessity. That his investment in the relationship, if he chose to invest, would be investment coming from a position of surplus rather than deficit. That he was not going to be drawing on the relationship's resources to fill gaps in his own basic security needs, because those needs were already met. The female nervous system, shaped by the same evolutionary pressures that shape the male preference for youth and fertility signals I described in the previous video, became specifically calibrated to detect and respond to those signals of genuine self-sufficiency with elevated attraction. Not because women consciously decided that non-needy men are more attractive, because the evolutionary record showed that men who were genuinely self-sufficient were the partners most likely to provide stable and surplus investment in a partnership and its offspring, rather than drawing on the partnership's resources to meet their own deficits. That calibration, like the male attraction calibration I described in the previous video, does not update itself to reflect the contemporary dating landscape. It runs the same program it has always run. And the program produces the specific and often confusing experience that women in this demographic describe when they encounter a genuinely self-sufficient man, a pull toward him that feels stronger and more persistent than the pull toward men who are more obviously available and more obviously interested, even when their conscious preferences suggest the more available man should feel like the safer and more appealing choice. The attachment layer is the second mechanism, and it adds a dimension to the evolutionary explanation that makes it considerably more practically useful. John Bowlby's attachment theory and its subsequent development by researchers including Mary Main and more recently Sue Johnson describes adult romantic attraction as significantly shaped by the specific attachment dynamics the person developed in their earliest primary relationships. Adults with anxious attachment histories, who internalized early in life the expectation that connection is available but unreliable, that the primary attachment figure might be present and available or might not be, and that sustained effort and vigilance are required to maintain access to connection, consistently show elevated attraction toward partners who recreate that specific dynamic. The genuinely self-sufficient man who is interested but not needy, who is warm but not anxious about the connection, who is present in the moments of contact and genuinely occupied with his own life in the intervals between them, is recreating for an anxiously attached woman the specific relational dynamic that her attachment system learned to orient toward as the primary template for intimate connection. He is available enough to be genuinely interesting and uncertain enough in his continued availability to activate the specific and heightened attention that the anxious attachment system reserves for exactly this configuration. This is not a pleasant thing for an anxiously attached woman to hear about herself, and I want to acknowledge that directly, rather than moving past it. The recognition that a significant component of the elevated attraction she feels toward the unbothered man is her own attachment system, recreating a dynamic it internalized in conditions of insecurity rather than security, is not comfortable information. It is accurate information. And accurate information, even when it is uncomfortable, is more useful than the comfortable alternative, which is to simply experience the attraction without understanding its source and allow it to drive decisions whose foundations are not what they appear to be. The third mechanism is the social proof and scarcity dynamic, and this one is the most purely social, rather than biological or psychological in its foundations, though it interacts with both of the other mechanisms in ways that amplify their effects. Social proof is the well-documented cognitive shortcut through which human beings assess the value of things partly through the evidence of how other people assess them. A man who is clearly valued by the people in his life, whose social world reflects that he has built genuine connections that sustain him, carries a social proof signal that registers as attractive to women assessing him, because it is evidence that other people who know him have concluded he is worth investing in. The genuinely self-sufficient man who has rebuilt his life after gray divorce typically carries this signal in a form that the desperate and available man does not, because the social world he has built is organized around genuine mutual investment, rather than around the frantic social contact of a man who is trying to fill the isolation of his post-divorce life with quantity rather than quality. The woman who encounters him and observes the quality and depth of his existing connections is receiving social proof information that her evaluation system registers and weights, often below the level of conscious awareness, as evidence of genuine relational value. The scarcity mechanism compounds this. The genuinely self-sufficient man is not available to everyone, and he is not trying to be. He has a life that is genuinely full, which means that access to him requires genuine compatibility and genuine mutual interest, rather than simply the willingness to show up. The woman who recognizes that access to this man is not unlimited and is not guaranteed, that he will not reorganize his life around her presence, simply because she has indicated interest, is encountering a genuine scarcity that her evaluation system reads as a signal of value. What is scarce is valuable. What is universally and easily available is not, or at least not in the specific way that produces the sustained attraction rather than the initial interest. Picture this. There is a woman I know, I will call her Sandra, who described to me the specific experience of meeting a man at a dinner party about 18 months after her own divorce at 54. He was 61. He had been divorced for 3 years. He was warm, engaged, genuinely funny in a way that was not performed, and completely at ease with himself in a way that she could not quite locate the source of. He had asked her 2 genuinely curious questions about something she had mentioned in passing, and actually listened to the answers. He had not asked for her number at the end of the evening. He had said it was genuinely lovely to meet her and had meant it and had then gone home. Sandra told me she had thought about him for a week before she did something she had not done since her 20s and arranged through a mutual friend to make contact. She told me that nothing about his behavior at the dinner had been strategically designed to produce that response. She was perceptive enough to know the difference between the performance of indifference and the genuine article, and what she had encountered was the genuine article. What she could not fully explain, even to herself, was why the absence of pursuit had produced in her a desire to pursue. I want to give her the explanation now, because it is the explanation she deserved when she was asking herself the question. The desire to pursue the unbothered man is not a character flaw. It is not evidence of poor judgment or unhealthy patterns in isolation. It is the predictable output of 3 mechanisms: evolutionary, attachment-based, and social, all running simultaneously and all pointing in the same direction. The man who is genuinely self-sufficient, who has genuinely rebuilt, who is genuinely content in his own life, rather than performing contentment while privately hoping someone will relieve him of the necessity of sustaining it, that man is producing every signal that those three mechanisms are calibrated to respond to with elevated interest. The attraction is not irrational. It is the entirely rational output of systems that were designed to identify exactly this configuration as valuable. The practical implication for women navigating this experience is the same one I gave in the previous video about male attraction preferences. The initial signal is real, and it is not to be dismissed. The signal alone is not complete information about whether the specific man producing it is the right person to build something with. What it tells you is that this man has done the specific and demanding work becoming genuinely self-sufficient in the post-divorce years, rather than simply surviving them. That is real and relevant information about his character and his capacity. It does not tell you that you are compatible in the specific ways that produce genuine long-term partnership, that you share the values and the life stage concerns and the vision of what the next chapter of a life is for, that I described in the earlier video as the actual predictors of sustained relationship satisfaction. The practical implication for men over 50 who are in the post-divorce years and who are reading this as an explanation of something they have perhaps noticed in their own interactions with women is this: the self-sufficiency that is producing the signal is not something to perform or to deploy strategically. Performed self-sufficiency is the most legible of all performances to women who have been in long marriages and who have developed over decades the specific perceptual sensitivity required to distinguish between a man who is genuinely okay and a man who is pretending to be. The moment she detects the performance, and she will detect it, not necessarily immediately but certainly within the first few genuine conversations, the signal inverts. The pretended indifference of a man who is actually desperate registers as exactly what it is, and what it is produces the opposite of the attraction the genuine article produces. The only version of this that is worth anything is the real version. And the real version is not a strategy. It is the outcome of the specific and demanding work of rebuilding I described in the new male era video. The honest inventory, the deliberate identity rebuild, the social reconstruction, the physical reconstruction, the contribution reorientation. The man who has done that work is the man who is genuinely self-sufficient, not because he decided to perform it in the dating marketplace, but because the work itself produced it as its natural output. That man is not trying to drive anyone crazy. He is simply living the life he built. The effect he has on women who encounter him is the entirely predictable consequence of a genuinely rebuilt life, meeting three biological and psychological mechanisms that were designed to recognize exactly that configuration as valuable. Build the life. The rest follows from the building. Drop a comment. Women, have you experienced this specific dynamic, the unbothered man who drew you in more than the available one, and what did you eventually understand about what was driving it? Men, has the post-divorce rebuilding produced something in your interactions with women that surprised you, and what do you think it was actually reflecting about the work you had done? Subscribe to Real Talk ALK Relationships. Every week, Mr. Wesley breaks down the real psychology driving attraction, relationships, and the post-divorce landscape for men and women over 50, with the clinical precision that finally makes the patterns legible rather than simply frustrating.